The mountain man named Viggo Kincaid watched her from across the crowded saloon in Deadwood, South Dakota, and realized with startling clarity that she positioned herself like a shadow trying not to exist. It was June of 1876, and the town buzzed with prospectors and gamblers, drifters and dreamers, all of them loud and taking up space without apology. But the young woman with auburn hair pressed herself against the far wall as though she wished to melt into the rough timber. Viggo had come down from his cabin in the Black Hills for supplies, a journey he made only when absolute necessity demanded it. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway and arms corded with muscle from years of chopping wood, hauling traps and surviving winters that would break lesser men. His dark hair hung past his collar, and his beard was trimmed just enough to keep civilized. He wore buckskin and denim, and when he moved through a room, people noticed. They gave him space instinctively, recognizing something wild and untamed beneath the human form, but this woman interested him precisely because she did the opposite. She made herself small, invisible. Her dress was simple calico, faded but clean, and her hands clutched a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. She stood at the very edge of the room near the back door, her green eyes darting between the bar and the exit as though calculating escape routes. Viggo had been in Deadwood long enough to recognize the signs. She was new, or at least new to being alone. The way she held herself spoke of recent trauma, the kind that taught a person to expect violence or cruelty at any moment. He had seen that look on trapped animals before pulling them from steel jaws. He made his way through the crowd, his presence parting the sea of unwashed prospectors like mosses at the Red Sea. When he reached her corner, she stiffened, her eyes going wide. Up close, he could see she was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, with freckles scattered across her nose and a healing bruise along her jawline that someone had tried to cover with powder. "You look like you are waiting for someone," Viggo said, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried despite the noise around them. She blinked up at him, clearly torn between answering and bolting. "I am waiting for the hotel clerk. He said he would meet me here to discuss lodging." Her voice was soft but educated, with the careful diction of someone who had once known better circumstances. Viggo glanced toward the bar where the hotel clerk, a weasel-faced man named Silas Garrett, was taking money from a drunk miner while eyeing the woman with an expression that made Viggo's jaw tighten. "Silas Garrett is not an honest man," Viggo said bluntly, "especially not with women alone." She paled, her fingers tightening on her bundle. "I have nowhere else to go. I just arrived on today's stage from Cheyenne." Viggo studied her for a long moment, weighing his options. He had come to the mountains 10 years ago specifically to avoid other people and their endless complications. But something about this woman pulled at him, something beyond her obvious vulnerability. Perhaps it was the way she tried so hard to disappear when everything about her face suggested she had once been vibrant and alive. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then lifted her chin slightly. "Hannah Norton. Viggo Kincaid." He extended his hand, and after a moment she took it. Her palm was small and soft against his calloused one, but her grip was stronger than he expected. "I have a cabin about 8 miles northeast of here, up in the hills. I am heading back tomorrow morning. If you need honest work and a safe place to stay, you can come with me. I need help preserving meat and preparing for winter. The work is hard, but you would have your own room and fair wages." Hannah stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign language. "You are offering me work?" Just like that, just like that. "You do not know anything about me. I know you are standing in a corner trying not to be seen, which means someone taught you that being noticed is dangerous. I know you have a healing bruise on your face that you tried to hide. I know Silas Garrett is going to charge you double what the room is worth and then find excuses to enter it at night. And I know that I am not a man who enjoys seeing people suffer when I can help." He paused. "But the choice is yours. I will not force anything." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Why would you help a stranger?" "Because 10 years ago, someone helped me when I needed it most. I figure I owe the world a debt." Before Hannah could respond, Silas Garrett pushed through the crowd toward them, his smile oily and practiced. "Well now, Miss Norton, I see you have met our local hermit. Viggo, you should head back to your mountain before you scare off the lady." Viggo did not move, and his sighs made Silas take an involuntary step backward. "I was just offering Miss Norton honest employment. She will not be needing your hotel after all." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Now wait just a minute. We had an agreement." "We had nothing," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the tremor Viggo could see running through her. "I asked about lodging. I made no promises. You conniving little." Silas started forward, but Viggo shifted his weight, placing himself between the smaller man and Hannah. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The threat was implicit in every inch of his frame, in the stillness of a predator who knew exactly how much damage he could inflict. Silas backed down immediately, muttering curses under his breath as he retreated to the bar. Hannah let out a shaky breath, and Viggo noticed her hands were trembling. "Come on," he said quietly. "I know a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher. She is honest and her rates are fair. You can stay there tonight and we will leave at first light." Hannah followed him out of the saloon into the dusty street where the June sun still hung above the western hills. Deadwood sprawled around them in a chaos of hastily constructed buildings and muddy streets, the whole town feeling temporary despite the thousands who had flooded here seeking gold. Viggo led her down the main thoroughfare to a smaller side street where a 2-story house stood slightly apart from the others, its white paint fresh and its garden carefully tended. Mrs. Fletcher answered on the second knock, a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "Viggo Kincaid, as I live and breathe. What brings you down from your mountain? Supplies and a favor, Mrs. Fletcher. This is Hannah Norton. She needs a room for the night and I am vouching for her." Mrs. Fletcher's gaze swept over Hannah, taking in details that Viggo suspected he had missed. Her expression softened. "Of course, dear, come right in. Have you eaten? I have stew on the stove." The relief that flooded Hannah's face was painful to witness. "Thank you, I can pay." "We will settle accounts in the morning," Mrs. Fletcher said, already ushering her inside. She glanced back at Viggo. "You staying in town tonight? I will camp at the edge of town and meet Miss Norton here at dawn." "You will do no such thing. I have a room for you two, and don't argue. It is already getting dark, and I will not have you sleeping on the ground when I have a perfectly good bed going to waste." Viggo knew better than to argue with Mrs. Fletcher. She had been one of the few people in Deadwood who had treated him with respect rather than fear or curiosity, and he valued her opinion. "Yes, madam. Over dinner. Eaten at Mrs. Fletcher's dining table with good china and silver that seemed absurdly civilized in this rough town. Hannah gradually began to relax. Mrs. Fletcher had a gift for drawing people out without being intrusive, and by the time they finished the apple pie she served for dessert, Viggo had learned that Hannah had come from Pennsylvania, that she had been a schoolteacher, and that circumstances had forced her west with little more than the clothes on her back and the few possessions in her bundle. She did not elaborate on those circumstances, and neither Viggo nor Mrs. Fletcher pressed her. The bruise on her face told enough of the story for now. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in months, Viggo stared at the ceiling and wondered what he had gotten himself into. His life in the mountains was solitary by design. After the war and after everything that had happened in Kansas, he had wanted nothing more than to escape humanity and its endless capacity for violence and betrayal. He had built a life of silence and survival, of hunting and trapping and living by his own rules far from civilization. But something about Hannah Norton had awakened an old instinct he thought he had buried. The instinct to protect, to shelter, to stand between the innocent and the cruelty of the world. It was the same instinct that had made him a good soldier, and later had nearly destroyed him when he realized how easily that protective nature could be twisted into something terrible. He had thought he was done with people, done with caring, done with the complications that came with human connection. Yet here he was, offering his home to a stranger because he could not stand to see her pressed against a wall, trying to disappear. Dawn came cold and clear, the summer morning holding the chill that the Black Hills never quite lost, even in the warmest months. Viggo loaded his supplies onto his pack mule while Hannah said goodbye to Mrs. Fletcher, who pressed a basket of food into her hands and whispered something that made Hannah's eyes well with tears again. The journey to Viggo's cabin took most of the day. They followed game trails and creek beds, climbing steadily into the pine-covered hills where the air smelled of resin and wildflowers. Hannah kept pace without complaint, though Viggo noticed she tired as the day wore on. He adjusted their speed accordingly, stopping more frequently than he would have alone, always finding excuses that would not bruise her pride. She barely spoke during the journey, but her eyes were constantly moving, taking in the landscape with an expression that shifted from wariness to wonder. When an elk burst from the underbrush and bounded away through the trees, she gasped, her face lighting up with genuine delight. It was the first unguarded expression Viggo had seen from her, and it transformed her entirely. For a moment, he could see the person she must have been before whatever had happened to put that bruise on her face and that fear in her eyes. "I have never seen anything like this," Hannah said softly. "In Pennsylvania, everything was settled and civilized. This feels like the world is still being created." "It is wild," Viggo agreed. "That is why I came here. No people to answer to, no expectations, just survival and silence." Hannah glanced at him curiously. "You do not like people much, do you?" "I like people fine when they act like people. But I have seen what we are capable of when civilization peels away. Sometimes the animals in these woods are better company than what you find in town." She seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "I think I understand that more than I would have a few months ago." They reached the cabin as the sun angled toward the western peaks, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Viggo had built the structure himself over the course of 2 years, fitting the logs together with careful precision and thinking the stones for the chimney from the creek bed below. It was a solid building, meant to withstand the brutal winters this high in the hills, with 2 rooms separated by a thick curtain and a loft above for storage. The windows had real glass, which had cost him dearly but was worth it for the light they let in during the long, dark months. Behind the cabin stood a smokehouse, a root cellar dug into the hillside, and a small barn for the mule and the 2 horses Viggo kept. A vegetable garden sprawled in the clearing, already showing the green shoots of potatoes, carrots, and beans. Further out, his trap lines radiated into the forest, and higher up the mountain, he had built a small observation post where he could watch for weather or trouble. Hannah stood taking it all in, and Viggo tried to see it through her eyes. To him it was home, every board and stone placed with his own hands, every corner known and familiar. To her it must seem impossibly remote and isolated. "It is not much," he said, "but it is solid and safe." "It is beautiful," Hannah replied, and she sounded like she meant it. "You built all of this yourself, over time. Keeps me busy." He gestured toward the cabin. "The back room is yours. It has a bed, a chest for your things, and a window that latches from the inside. I sleep out here in the main room or in the loft when winter comes. The necessary is behind the smokehouse, and the creek is about 50 yards down the slope for water. I keep firearms loaded but secured above the door and in the bedroom. You should know where they are in case you ever need them." Hannah nodded, her expression serious. "What exactly would you need me to do?" "Right now, preserving meat. I have been hunting deer and elk, and the meat needs to be smoked or salted before it spoils. Later in the summer, there is the garden to tend and berries to collect and preserve. Come fall, more hunting and preparation for winter. Firewood is always needed. Clothes need mending. It is endless work, if I am honest, but it is good work, necessary work." "I can do that," Hannah said. "I am stronger than I look." "I am sure you are." Viggo handed her the basket Mrs. Fletcher had given them. "Get settled in while I tend to the animals. We will eat in an hour or so." He left her to explore the cabin while he unpacked the mule and fed the horses, taking his time to give her space to adjust. When he finally came inside, he found her standing in the main room looking at the books on his shelf, a simple set of planks he had mounted above the fireplace. Her expression was surprised. "I did not expect to find Shakespeare this far from civilization," she said, touching the spine of a worn volume. "I was not always a mountain man," Viggo replied. "Before the war I had other plans. College, maybe, teaching. Then everything changed." "What happened?" He busied himself building up the fire, not sure how to answer. "The war happened. 4 years of killing. After that I tried to go back to Kansas, tried to rebuild what I had lost, but I could not make it fit anymore. So I came here where nobody asks questions, and the only thing that matters is whether you can survive." Hannah was quiet for a long moment. "I understand that too, the feeling that you cannot go back to who you used to be." They ate a simple meal of salt pork and beans with the bread misses Fletcher had sent, and slowly, Hannah began to talk. She told him about her small town in Pennsylvania, about teaching children to read and write in a one-room schoolhouse. She told him about her father dying when she was 19, leaving her alone except for an uncle who had agreed to take her in. She did not say much about the uncle, but her hand unconsciously rose to touch the fading bruise on her jaw, and Viggo did not need more explanation than that. She had fled westward with money saved from her teaching, hoping to find work in one of the growing towns where women were scarce and skills were valued. But the journey had been harder than she expected, and her funds had run low by the time she reached Deadwood. She had been prepared to accept whatever help she could find, even from someone like Silas Garrett, because the alternative was starvation or worse. "You took a risk coming with me," Viggo said when she finished. "For all you knew, I could have been worse than Garrett." "No," Hannah said simply. "I could see you were not. I spent 2 years learning to recognize dangerous men, Mr. Kincaid. You are not one of them. Call me Viggo. And I hope you are right about that." The first weeks passed in hard work and careful distance. Viggo showed Hannah how to cut meat into thin strips for the smokehouse, how to prepare the brine for salting, how to render fat and make soap, and 100 other tasks necessary for survival in the mountains. She learned quickly, her hands growing calloused but capable, her movements gaining confidence. She still made herself small sometimes, especially when Viggo moved too quickly or raised his voice to be heard over the wind. But gradually, he noticed her beginning to relax. She started singing while she worked in the garden, old hymns and folk songs that drifted up to where he was chopping wood or checking trap lines. She laughed one day when a young deer ventured into the clearing and stole a mouthful of bean plants before she could shoo it away. Viggo found himself adjusting his routines to accommodate her presence. He made sure to announce himself when coming into the cabin so he would not startle her. He kept his movements slow and predictable around her, the way he would with a half-wild horse learning to trust. He left space for her to retreat when she needed it, but made sure she knew she was welcome in the shared areas of their small homestead. At night, they fell into the habit of sitting by the fire after supper, reading or talking quietly while the darkness pressed in around the cabin. Hannah devoured his small collection of books and talked about them with an intelligence and passion that reminded Viggo of conversations he had once had in another lifetime. She had opinions and ideas, and once she realized he genuinely wanted to hear them, she stopped apologizing for taking up space in the conversation. One evening in late July, a summer storm rolled through the mountains with violent intensity. Lightning cracked the sky open and thunder shook the cabin's foundations. Viggo was sitting by the fire, repairing a trap when he heard a sound from Hannah's room. He found her sitting on her bed, her arms wrapped around herself, her breathing rapid and shallow. "Hannah." "I am sorry," she gasped. "I know it is foolish, it is just a storm." But Viggo could see it was more than that. Something about the violence of the weather had triggered a memory, a fear that went beyond rational concern. He sat down carefully on the chair near her door, keeping distance between them but staying close enough to ground her with his presence. "Tell me about your schoolhouse," he said. "What did it look like?" The question was random enough to break through her panic. She blinked at him. "What?" "Your schoolhouse in Pennsylvania. Describe it to me." Slowly, haltingly, she began to talk. As she focused on the memory, her breathing steadied. She told him about the white clapboard building with its bell tower, about the slate boards and the rows of small desks, about the children who came from surrounding farms, eager to learn or resentful of the time taken from chores. She told him about teaching them to read using whatever books she could gather, about the way their faces lit up when understanding finally came. By the time she finished, the worst of the storm had passed, and she was calm again. She looked at him with something like wonder. "How did you know to do that?" "Learned it during the war. When men got lost in their own heads, sometimes you had to give them something else to focus on. A memory, a task, something to anchor them back to the present." "Thank you," Hannah said softly. "My uncle would get angry during storms." "He would." She stopped, swallowed hard. "It is difficult not to remember." "Memory is a peculiar thing," Viggo said. "It does not fade because we want it to, but you can build new memories around the old ones, better ones. Eventually, they take up more space." "Is that what you did?" "After the war. I am still working on it." Something shifted between them after that night. Hannah stopped retreating to her room immediately after supper. She started sitting closer to Viggo by the fire, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she made. She asked him questions about his life before the mountains, and he found himself answering with an honesty he had not shown anyone in years. He told her about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about his mother who had taught him to read and his father who had taught him to work the land. He told her about joining the Union Army at 18, full of ideals and certainty about right and wrong. He told her about coming home 4 years later to find his parents dead from disease, and the farm sold for taxes, about his failed attempt to start over, about the violence and anger that had consumed him until he realized he needed to leave before he became something irredeemable. "I was not a good man after the war," he said. "I hurt people who probably did not deserve it. I was so angry all the time at everything and everyone. I finally understood that I had to choose either to die or to leave everything behind and find a way to live with what I had become." So I came here. And did you find it? A way to live with it? Some days. Other days I just survive. But it is better than what I left behind. Hannah reached out and placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. The touch was brief, but it sent electricity up his arm. I think you are a better man than you believe, Viggo Kincaid. You do not know everything I have done. I know you gave a desperate woman a safe place when you could have ignored her. I know you are patient and kind, even when you pretend to be gruff. I know you built this beautiful place with your own hands, and you live by your own rules without hurting anyone. That seems like a good man to me. Viggo looked at her, really looked at her, and realized with a jolt that somewhere along the way, she had stopped being a stranger he was helping and had become someone precious to him. Her auburn hair caught the firelight, and her green eyes held his gaze without flinching. She had gained weight since arriving, her face filling out and losing the gaunt, hunted look. She smiled more often now, and when she did, it felt like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. She had survived things that would have broken many people, and instead of letting that survival make her bitter or cruel, she remained gentle and hopeful. She still stood at the edge of rooms sometimes, still made herself small when uncertainty struck, but she was learning to take up space again. To exist without apology. And Viggo wanted desperately to be part of that journey, to help her find her way back to the person she was meant to be. But more selfishly, he wanted her to stay not just because she needed safety, but because she wanted to be here, with him. The realization terrified him. He had sworn off attachments, convinced that caring for people only led to loss and pain. But here was Hannah, weaving herself into the fabric of his daily life, making his isolated cabin feel like a home instead of just a shelter. I should check the animals, he said abruptly, standing up. Sometimes storms spook them. If Hannah noticed his sudden retreat, she did not comment on it. She simply nodded and returned to her book, though Viggo thought he saw a flicker of disappointment cross her face. August brought scorching days and cool nights, the mountains ablaze with wildflowers and the garden producing more vegetables than two people could easily eat. Hannah suggested they take some down to Deadwood to sell or trade, and though Viggo initially resisted the idea of returning to town, he eventually agreed. They loaded the mule with surplus vegetables, smoked meat, and some of the soap Hannah had become skilled at making. Deadwood had grown even more chaotic in the intervening weeks, the population swelling with new arrivals chasing gold fever. They sold their goods quickly, and Hannah insisted on visiting Mrs. Fletcher, who welcomed them both with obvious delight. "I am so pleased to see you looking well, Mrs. Fletcher said to Hannah, pulling her aside while Viggo waited on the porch. Through the open window he could hear their conversation. "He is a good man," Mrs. Fletcher was saying, "but you should know he has been alone a long time. He may not know how to be with people anymore." "He has been nothing but kind to me," Hannah replied. "I can see that. But I can also see the way you look at him, dear, and the way he looks at you when he thinks you are not paying attention. I just want you to be careful with your heart." "My heart has been careful for a long time, Mrs. Fletcher. Maybe too careful. Maybe it is time to take a risk." Viggo moved away from the window, his pulse racing. He had not realized he had been so obvious in his regard for Hannah. The idea that others could see his growing feelings made them more real, more dangerous, more impossible to ignore. On the ride back to the cabin, he found himself hyper-aware of Hannah riding beside him. The way she sat her horse with increasing confidence, the way she pointed out a red-tailed hawk circling above them, the way she laughed when the mule tried to steal her hat. Everything about her drew him in, made him want things he had convinced himself he no longer needed. That night, After supper, Hannah surprised him by producing a bottle of whiskey she had purchased in town. "I thought we could celebrate," she said. 2 months of successful partnership and survival. They shared the whiskey, passing the bottle back and forth while the fire crackled and the night sounds of the forest filtered through the open window. The alcohol loosened Viggo's carefully maintained control, and he found himself talking more freely than usual, telling her stories from before the war, from a time when life had seemed full of possibility rather than just endurance. Hannah told him more about her teaching, about specific children she had loved and lessons that had gone comically wrong. She told him about her mother, who had died when Hannah was young, and her father, who had raised her with books and learning because he believed education was the most important gift he could give his daughter. "He would have liked you," Hannah said, her words slightly slurred. "He respected men who used their minds as much as their hands. I am not sure I use my mind much these days. Mostly I just try not to think too hard about anything." "That is not true. You are always thinking. I can see it in your face. You watch everything, consider everything. You are just quiet about it. What else do you see when you look at me?" The question came out before Viggo could stop it, the whiskey making him bolder than wisdom would allow. Hannah's eyes met his across the fire, and the air between them suddenly felt charged with more than just heat from the flames. "I see someone who has been hurt and decided to hurt himself further by cutting himself off from everyone. I see someone who is strong enough to survive alone but brave enough to let someone in when it matters. I see someone I trust completely, which is something I never thought I would say about anyone again." Viggo set down the whiskey bottle with exaggerated care. "Hannah, I know what you are going to say," she interrupted. "That this is complicated, that I work for you, that I am probably just confused because you saved me and gave me a safe place. But none of that is true. I am not confused. I know exactly how I feel." "How do you feel?" She stood up and crossed the small distance between them, standing so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "I feel like I have spent 2 years trying to disappear, trying to be invisible, trying to survive by taking up as little space as possible. And then you came into that saloon and saw me anyway. You saw me when I was trying my hardest not to be seen, and you did not look away." "I could not look away," Viggo admitted, his voice rough. "You pulled at something in me I thought was long dead. Then why do you keep pulling back? Why do you retreat every time we get close to something real?" "Because I am afraid," he said simply. "I am afraid that caring about you means I can lose you. I am afraid that I am not capable of being what you need. I am afraid that the violence in me, the damage the war did, will somehow hurt you even though I would rather die than let that happen." Hannah reached out and took his face in her hands, her touch gentle but firm. "Viggo Kincaid, you are the least violent man I have ever known. Do you know what real violence looks like? It looks like my uncle deciding he owned me because he gave me a roof over my head. It looks like him hitting me for contradicting him, for talking too much, for existing in ways he did not approve of. You are not violent. You are controlled and careful and so determined not to hurt anyone that you hurt yourself instead. Hannah, I am going to kiss you now," she said, "and you can decide what you want to do about it." She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and Viggo felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, but when he did not pull away, Hannah deepened it, her hands sliding from his face to his shoulders. Viggo's arms came up to encircle her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss transformed into something desperate and necessary, as though they had both been holding their breath for months and finally remembered how to breathe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Viggo rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything. I hope so, Hannah whispered. I am tired of standing at the edge of things, Viggo. I am tired of making myself small. I want to be in the center of a life, not hiding at the edges. Then stay here, in the center, with me. Is that what you want? More than I have wanted anything in a very long time. They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other with a tenderness that made Viggo's chest ache. When Hannah finally retreated to her room, she paused at the curtain and looked back at him. This is not just gratitude, Viggo. This is not just because you helped me. I need you to know that. I know, he said, though part of him still struggled to believe it. Sleep well, Hannah. You too. But sleep was a long time coming. Viggo lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, his lips still tingling from Hannah's kisses, his mind racing through 1,000 possibilities and problems. He had lived alone so long that the idea of building a life with another person seemed both wonderful and impossible. What if he was not capable of it anymore? What if his isolation had made him too strange, too damaged, too fundamentally broken to be a good partner? But then he remembered the way Hannah had looked at him, the certainty in her voice when she said she knew how she felt. She was not a woman who made rash decisions or gave her trust lightly. If she believed in him, perhaps he could learn to believe in himself. The days that followed were both the same and entirely different. They still worked side by side on the endless tasks of survival. But now, there were stolen kisses in the garden, hands that lingered when passing tools, conversations that stretched late into the night as they sat close together by the fire. Viggo found himself telling Hannah things he had never told anyone, about the nightmares that still woke him some nights, about the guilt he carried for men he had killed in the war, about his fear that he was too damaged to ever be whole again. Hannah listened without judgment, and in turn, she shared her own fears and wounds. She told him about the escalating violence from her uncle, about the night she had finally fled with nothing but a bag of clothes and her mother's locket. She told him about the shame she felt for not leaving sooner, for enduring abuse for as long as she had, even though she logically understood she had done what she needed to survive. Surviving is not shameful, Viggo told her. Surviving is the bravest thing you can do. Then you should give yourself the same grace, Hannah replied. Everything you did in the war, everything you did after you did to survive, you are allowed to forgive yourself. I do not know how. Then let me help you learn. By September, when the aspen leaves turned gold and the nights grew cold enough to frost, Viggo could no longer imagine his life without Hannah in it. She had transformed his lonely cabin into a home, filled it with laughter and song, and the kind of comfortable companionship he had never thought to find. She challenged him intellectually, matched him physically in the work that needed doing, and loved him with a fierce certainty that still sometimes took his breath away. One evening, as they prepared for the first serious snowfall of the season, Hannah brought up the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. Viggo, we need to talk about what this is, what we are. He looked up from the firewood he was stacking. What do you mean? I mean we have been living as though we are just employer and employee with some romantic attachment, but that is not what this is. Not for me. I love you. I want to build a life with you. But I need to know if you want the same thing or if you still see this as temporary. Viggo set down the wood and crossed to where she stood. There is nothing temporary about how I feel about you, Hannah. I love you. I have loved you since you stood in that saloon trying to make yourself invisible, and I realized I never wanted to look away. Then marry me, Hannah said. Not because it is expected or proper, but because I want to be your wife. I want to be your partner in this life you have built. I want to stand in the center of our life together, not at the edges. You have always been at the center, Viggo said, pulling her into his arms. From the moment I saw you, you became the center of everything. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I want you as my wife. Yes to all of it." Hannah laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I did not expect proposing to a man to be so terrifying. You are the bravest person I know." They rode down to Deadwood the next week, and were married by a traveling preacher in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor, with Mrs. Fletcher and a few of her boarders as witnesses. Hannah wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Viggo had bought as a surprise, and Viggo wore clean clothes that made him feel slightly ridiculous, but earned him an appreciative look from his bride that made the discomfort worthwhile. The ceremony was brief, but when Viggo said his vows, promising to love and cherish and protect Hannah for the rest of his days, he meant every word with a sincerity that surprised him. He had not thought himself capable of this kind of commitment anymore, but here he was, binding his life to another person's and feeling not trapped but liberated. They spent their wedding night at Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house in a room with lace curtains and a real feather bed, and Viggo made love to his wife with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and laughing and tangled in each other's arms as dawn broke over the Black Hills. "I never thought I could have this," Hannah whispered against his chest. "I thought I was too broken." "You were never broken," Viggo replied, kissing the top of her head. "You were just waiting for someone who could see all of you and love you anyway. You love me not despite the broken parts, but because of everything I am." Exactly. Winter came early and hard that year, snow piling up against the cabin walls and temperatures plunging to dangerous depths. But inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the quiet contentment of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. They read together, cooked together, made love by firelight, and talked about the future in ways that made that future feel real and possible. Hannah proved herself capable of handling the isolation that had driven other people away from mountain life. She did not complain about the cold or the endless work or the weeks when the snow was too deep to make the journey to town. Instead, she thrived, her strength and resilience blooming now that she was free from fear and violence. Viggo watched his wife move through their home with increasing confidence, no longer pressing herself against walls or making herself small. She took up space now, claimed her place at the center of their shared life, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever witnessed. One night in late January, as a blizzard raged outside and they huddled close to the fire, Hannah told him she was pregnant. "Are you sure?" Viggo asked, his heart hammering. "I am sure. I think it happened around Christmas. We are going to have a baby in late summer." Terror and joy warred in Viggo's chest. "I do not know how to be a father, and I do not know how to be a mother. We will learn together." Hannah took his hands in hers. "Are you happy about this?" "I am terrified," Viggo admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I am so happy I do not know what to do with it." "Then show me." He kissed her deeply, then slid to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach. "I am going to do better for you," he whispered to the child growing inside her. "I am going to be the kind of father who protects without controlling, who guides without breaking. I am going to give you a life full of love and safety and all the things I lost." Hannah ran her fingers through his hair, her touch gentle. "You are going to be a wonderful father, Viggo Kincaid. I have no doubt about that." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the late winter and into spring. As Hannah's belly grew round, Viggo found himself becoming almost comically protective, insisting she rest more and let him handle the heavier work. Hannah tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she drew the line at being treated as an invalid. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said one afternoon when he tried to insist she stay inside instead of working in the garden. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am perfectly capable of planting beans. I know, I just worry." "I know you do." But worrying too much is just another way of trying to control things you cannot control. Trust me to know my own limits." He did trust her, and slowly he learned to step back and let her make her own decisions about what she could and could not handle. It was another lesson in letting go of fear, in choosing faith over control. By May, Hannah's belly was unmistakable, and they made a trip to Deadwood to stock up on supplies before the baby came. Mrs. Fletcher was delighted by the news and insisted on throwing them a small celebration, inviting several of the more respectable women in town who provided Hannah with advice, hand-sewn baby clothes, and the kind of community support that made her eyes well with grateful tears. "You have built a good life," Mrs. Fletcher said to Viggo while Hannah was occupied with the other women. "That girl was barely holding on when you brought her to me last summer. Now look at her, glowing with health and happiness." "She saved me as much as I saved her," Viggo replied. "Maybe more." "That is how it works with the right person. You save each other." Their son was born on a sweltering August afternoon during a thunderstorm that reminded Viggo painfully of the night he had first truly connected with Hannah. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Viggo felt his carefully controlled fear threatening to overwhelm him. But Hannah was strong, stronger than he had given her credit for, and when the baby finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Viggo felt something in his chest crack open and release years of accumulated pain and isolation. "A boy," Hannah panted, exhausted but radiant. "We have a son." Viggo took the tiny, squalling infant in his huge hands, marveling at how impossibly small and perfect he was. "Hello, little one. I am your father." The baby stopped crying and blinked up at him with unfocused blue eyes, and Viggo felt love crash over him with tsunami force. This tiny person was his son, his and Hannah's, a new life that represented hope and possibility and everything good they could build together. "What should we name him?" Hannah asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, holding his son, only one name felt right. "What about Victor? It means conqueror, which seems fitting for someone who already survived being born in a mountain cabin during a thunderstorm." "Victor Kincaid," Hannah said, testing it. "I like it. Victor, you are going to have quite a life, I think." The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Victor was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an apparently bottomless appetite. Hannah nursed him while Viggo handled everything else, cooking and cleaning and managing the endless tasks that kept their homestead running. They took turns walking the baby when he fussed at night, and sometimes Viggo would stand on the porch in the darkness, his son cradled against his massive chest, and marvel at the fact that this was his life now. He had thought he would spend the rest of his days alone, isolated by choice and circumstance. Instead, he had a wife he loved beyond reason, and a son who represented a future he had never dared imagine. The violence and pain of his past had not disappeared, but it had been joined by something stronger and better. Love, family, purpose beyond mere survival. One evening in late September, when Victor was about a month old, Hannah found Viggo sitting on the porch watching the sunset with their son sleeping in his arms. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling beside him. "About how different my life is from what I expected. A year ago, I was completely alone. I had convinced myself that was what I wanted, what I needed. And then you walked into that saloon trying to be invisible, and everything changed." "I am glad you saw me," Hannah said softly. "I am glad you pulled me out of the shadows and into the center of your life." "You pulled yourself out," Viggo corrected. "I just gave you a safe place to do it. You are the strongest person I know, Hannah. You survived things that would have destroyed most people, and instead of letting that survival make you hard and bitter, You stayed kind and hopeful. You taught me that it is possible to live with pain and still find joy." "We taught each other that," Hannah said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the western peaks, and the first stars emerged in the darkening sky. Victor stirred in Viggo's arms, making small sucking noises in his sleep. Viggo adjusted him carefully, still amazed by how something so small and fragile could inspire such fierce protectiveness. "I want more of this," Hannah said suddenly. "More children, I mean. Not right away, but eventually. I want Victor to have siblings. I want to fill this cabin with life and noise and love." "I want that too," Viggo admitted. "I never thought I did, but now that I have it, I want more. I want to build something that lasts, something that matters beyond just survival." "Then we will," Hannah said with the certainty that he had come to know so well. "We will build a life so full of love that it crowds out all the darkness that came before." As the years passed, they did exactly that. Hannah gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Helena when Victor was 2, and another son they named Henry when Helena was 3. The cabin grew crowded and noisy, full of childish laughter and arguments and the constant motion of small bodies learning to navigate the world. Viggo expanded the cabin, building an additional room so the children would not have to sleep in the loft, and he built a proper school room where Hannah could teach their children to read and write. She took to motherhood with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else, raising their children to be strong and kind and unafraid to take up space in the world. Victor grew into a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, quiet but thoughtful, always watching and learning. Helena was pure fire, constantly in motion, constantly asking questions, fearless in a way that both delighted and terrified her parents. Henry was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, content to follow his older siblings on whatever adventure they devised. Viggo taught them to hunt and fish and survive in the wilderness, but Hannah insisted they also learn literature and mathematics and history. She created lessons from whatever books they could acquire on trips to Deadwood, which had settled into something resembling a permanent town, now that the initial gold rush had faded into steady mining operations. The family made the journey to town several times a year, selling furs and preserved meat and the crafts Hannah made during the long winter months. Mrs. Fletcher became a surrogate grandmother to the children, always having cookies waiting and stories to tell. The cabin in the mountains remained their true home, but they were no longer isolated from the world. They had built connections, friendships, a place in the growing community. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Viggo took Hannah on a long ride up to a high mountain meadow he had discovered years before he met her. They left the children with Mrs. Fletcher for 2 days, the first time they had been completely alone since Victor was born. The meadow was carpeted with wildflowers, and a small stream cut through it, the water so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom. They made camp under a stand of aspen trees and spent the evening talking the way they had in those early days, when they were first learning each other. "Do you remember that first night in the saloon?" Viggo asked as they lay on their blankets watching stars emerge in the summer sky. "You were pressed against that back wall like you could disappear into it." I remember thinking I would take any help I could get, even from Sela's garret. I was that desperate. What made you trust me instead?" Hannah was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I think it was the way you looked at me. Not like I was a problem to solve or an object to acquire, but like I was a person you genuinely wanted to help. And there was something in your eyes that matched something in mine. Recognition, maybe. We were both trying to survive things that had broken us." "I am glad I saw you," Viggo said. I am glad I could not walk away. I am glad, too. You gave me back my life, Viggo. You gave me a safe place to heal and become myself again. You pulled me from the edges to the center, and you never made me feel like that was conditional. You loved me when I was still learning to love myself. You did the same for me, Viggo said. I was barely living before you, just surviving, just enduring. You taught me that life could be more than that. You taught me that taking risks on people is worth it, that love is worth it. Was I a risk, the best risk I ever took? They made love under the stars, slow and tender, and full of the deep familiarity that comes from years of knowing another person completely. Afterward, Hannah traced the scars on Viggo's chest, old wounds from the war and from the hard life he had lived since. You still have nightmares? She asked. Sometimes, but less often now, and when I wake up from them you are there, that makes all the difference. I still have them too, about my uncle, about the fear, but you are right. Waking up next to you makes them fade faster. We healed each other, Viggo said. That is what love does when it is real. Yes, Hannah agreed. That is exactly what it does. They returned to the cabin to find their children had been perfect angels for Mrs. Fletcher, according to her, though Viggo suspected she was being generous. The children launched themselves at their parents with the enthusiasm of puppies, all talking at once about the adventures they had in town. Life settled back into its comfortable rhythms. The work of maintaining their homestead was constant, but it was good work, meaningful work. Viggo still trapped and hunted, still made trips into the high country for the solitude he occasionally needed. But he always came back to the cabin, to Hannah and the children, to the life they had built together. When Victor turned 16, he announced that he wanted to study engineering, inspired by the expanding railroad networks and mining operations transforming the West. Viggo and Hannah made arrangements for him to apprentice with a mining engineer in Deadwood, though it meant their eldest would live in town most of the year. He has to find his own path, Hannah said as they watched Victor ride away with his few possessions packed on his horse. We gave him the tools, now we have to trust him to use them. When did our children get old enough to leave? Viggo asked, feeling the weight of time pressing on him when we were not looking. Hannah slipped her hand into his. But he will be back. This is home. It will always be home. She was right. Victor came back regularly, full of stories about the new technologies he was learning and the projects he was working on. Helena declared she wanted to be a doctor after helping deliver a neighbor's baby, and Hannah began teaching her everything she knew about medicine and healing. Henry decided he wanted to ranch, raising horses in the mountain valleys. The children grew into adults, each finding their own version of success and happiness, but all of them remained close to the cabin in the Black Hills where they had been raised. They brought spouses home eventually, and then grandchildren, until the lonely cabin that Viggo had built to isolate himself became the center of a sprawling, loving family. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Viggo and Hannah sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the clearing where Hannah had once tended a small garden. The cabin had been expanded multiple times, and additional buildings had been added to accommodate the growing family that gathered here for holidays and special occasions. We built something good, Hannah said. We took all that pain and fear and turned it into this. Viggo looked at his wife, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes still the same brilliant green that had caught his attention in that saloon so many years ago. She had laugh lines around her eyes and mouth now, evidence of a life lived fully and joyfully. You built this, he corrected. I just gave you the space to do it. We built it together, Hannah insisted. That is what partnership means. You saw me when I was trying to be invisible and you pulled me into the center of your life, and I pulled you out of isolation into a family. We saved each other." "We did," Viggo agreed. He took her hand, calloused and strong from decades of work, and brought it to his lips. "I love you, Hannah Kincaid. I have loved you from the moment I saw you standing at the edge of that saloon, and I will love you until I draw my last breath." "And I love you, Viggo Kincaid. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You gave me safety and love and a family I never thought I would have. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play as the sun set over the Black Hills. The mountains that had once been Viggo's refuge from the world had become the foundation for something much greater. A family, a legacy. A love story that had started with a broken woman trying to disappear and a lonely man who could not look away. Hannah had been standing at the edge of rooms, trying to make herself invisible, when Viggo pulled her into the center of his life. And in doing so, they had both found their way home. Not to a place, but to each other. To the life they had built together in these wild mountains, surrounded by the family their love had created. As darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, their children called everyone inside for dinner. The cabin blazed with light and warmth, filled with the sounds of multiple generations talking and laughing and simply being together. Viggo stood on the porch for one more moment, taking it all in, marveling at the distance he had traveled from the angry, isolated man he had been. Hannah appeared beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Coming inside, in a moment, I am just appreciating what we have. It is pretty wonderful, is it not? More than wonderful, perfect." "Not perfect," Hannah corrected with a smile. "Perfect is boring. This is real and complicated and sometimes messy, but it is ours. We earned it." "Yes," Viggo said, pulling her close. "We did." They stood together on the porch, two people who had found each other in the midst of their separate darknesses and had built a life full of light and love and laughter. They had taken their broken pieces and fit them together into something beautiful and strong. They had pulled each other from the edges into the center, and in that center, they had found everything they needed. Finally, they turned and walked inside together, into the warmth and light and love of the family they had created. The door closed behind them, shutting out the darkness of the mountain night, and inside the cabin, the celebration continued, the sound of their family's joy echoing out into the wilderness like a promise that hope and healing and love were always possible, even in the wildest places. Years continued to pass in the rhythm of mountain life. Viggo and Hannah grew older together, their hair turning silver, their movements slowing but their love only deepening with time. They had weathered storms together, both literal and metaphorical, and each challenge had only strengthened the bond between them. On their 30th anniversary, Victor brought his family up to the cabin for a surprise celebration. All three of their children came with spouses and grandchildren, and the clearing rang with the joyful chaos of family reunion. They roasted venison over an open fire, and the grandchildren begged for stories about the old days, about how Grandma and Grandpa had met. "Your grandmother was the bravest person I ever met," Viggo told them, his arm around Hannah as they sat surrounded by their descendants. "She had been through terrible things, but she did not let that break her spirit. She was just waiting for the right place to let it shine again. And your grandfather saw me when I was trying very hard not to be seen," Hannah added. "He gave me safety and respect and time to heal. He showed me that not all strength comes from being loud or taking up space. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is offer gentleness to someone who needs it." "Tell us about the first time you knew you loved each other," Helena's daughter asked, a romantic 12-year-old who loved love stories. Viggo and Hannah looked at each other, and they both smiled, that private smile that spoke of shared memories and deep understanding. "I think I loved your grandmother from the first moment I saw her," Viggo said. "But I knew I loved her the night of the big thunderstorm, when she let me help her through her fear. That was when I realized I did not just want to protect her. I wanted to know her, all of her, the scared parts and the strong parts and everything in between. And I knew I loved your grandfather when I realized he never tried to fix me," Hannah said. "He just gave me space to fix myself while making sure I knew I was not alone. That is real love. Not trying to change someone, but accepting them completely while helping them become whoever they are meant to be." The celebration lasted long into the night, and when everyone finally settled down to sleep, bodies spread throughout the cabin and tents erected in the clearing, Viggo and Hannah retreated to their room. It was the same room Hannah had first occupied as an employee, but it had been expanded and improved over the years, transformed from a simple space into a comfortable retreat. 30 years, Hannah said, sitting on the bed and watching Viggo undress. Even at 62, he was still powerfully built, his body marked by years of hard work but still strong. "Has it felt like 30 years to you?" "Yes and no," Viggo replied. "Some days feel like we just met. Other days I cannot remember what life was like before you. It all blurs together into this single continuous experience of loving you. That is how it feels for me too, like you have always been here, like this was always meant to be our life. Maybe it was. Maybe all the pain and loss we both went through was just the universe's way of getting us to that saloon on that particular day at that particular moment." "I like that idea," Hannah said. "That everything, even the terrible things, had purpose." Viggo sat beside her on the bed and took her hand. "I am grateful for every day I have had with you, every moment, even the hard ones because we faced them together." "Me too." Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder. "When I was standing in that saloon trying to be invisible, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was survival. I never imagined I could have this. Love, family, home, you gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Viggo said firmly. "That is what you need to understand, Hannah. I was barely living before you. You brought me back to life as much as I gave you safety. We were both standing at edges and we pulled each other to the center." "I suppose that is true," Hannah said softly. "We saved each other. We did. And we built something beautiful from that saving." They lay down together, fitting their bodies together in the way of long married couples who know every curve and angle of each other. Outside, the night sounds of the mountains filtered through the window, familiar and comforting. Somewhere in the cabin, one of the grandchildren laughed in their sleep, and the sound made them both smile. "What do you think happens next?" Hannah asked drowsily. "What does the next chapter of our life look like?" "More of this," Viggo replied. "More family, more love, more days of waking up beside you. We will get older and slower, and eventually one of us will leave before the other, which is painful to think about but inevitable. But until then, we live. We love. We appreciate every day we have together." "That sounds perfect." "It is better than perfect. It is real." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a life that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream. The years that followed were gentle ones. Viggo and Hannah gradually stepped back from the hardest physical labor, letting their children and grandchildren take over more of the work while they settled into the role of family elders. They spent their days reading, talking, walking the mountain trails they knew by heart, and watching their family grow and thrive. When Viggo was 73, he had a mild heart episode that reminded them both of their mortality. He recovered well, but it changed something in how they approached their remaining time. They became more deliberate about expressing their love, about making sure their children and grandchildren knew how much they were treasured, about capturing memories and stories before they faded. "I am not afraid of dying," Viggo told Hannah one evening as they sat watching the sunset from their favorite spot in the high meadow. "I have had a good life, a life full of more love and joy than I ever thought possible. My only regret is that I will not have forever with you." "We will have had 50 years together," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "That is more than most people get, and who knows, maybe whatever comes after death allows us to be together again. I hope so. I cannot imagine existence without you in it. Then we will make sure we find each other, wherever we end up, just like we found each other in that saloon in Deadwood." They held each other as the sun set behind the mountains, two old people whose love had only grown stronger and deeper with the passage of time. They had pulled each other from the edges into the center of life, and that center had expanded to include children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a whole clan that traced its origins back to one moment of connection between two broken people who decided to heal together. Viggo lived to be 81, dying peacefully in his sleep with Hannah holding his hand. His last words were her name, spoken with all the love and tenderness of their 54 years together. Hannah mourned him deeply but not bitterly, understanding that their story had been complete, that they had lived fully and loved completely. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged until the very end. She died in the same bed where Viggo had died, in the cabin they had built together, with her children and grandchildren gathered around her. Her last words were about Viggo, about seeing him in a meadow full of wildflowers, about him reaching out his hand to pull her into the center of whatever came next, just as he had pulled her into the center of his life all those years ago in Deadwood. The cabin in the Black Hills remained in the family for generations, a testament to the love story that had started there. Each generation added to it, expanded it, but the core remained the same. The bedroom where Viggo and Hannah had slept for 54 years was preserved as they had left it, and sometimes their descendants would sit in there and feel the presence of the love that had built their entire family. And in town, in Deadwood, the building that had once housed the saloon where a mountain man had first seen a woman trying to disappear was eventually torn down and replaced. But locals still told the story of Viggo and Hannah Kincaid, of how they had met and fallen in love, of how they had built a family and a legacy that transformed the mountains around them. It became a legend, the kind of story people told to remind themselves that love was real and powerful and worth risking everything for. That even broken people could heal together. That standing at the edges was not the end of the story, but the beginning. That sometimes, the most important thing one person could do for another was to see them when they were trying to be invisible and pull them gently into the center of life. The story of the mountain man and the woman who stood at edges became part of the history of the Black Hills, passed down through generations, as an example of what love could build when two people chose each other completely. It was a story of healing and hope, of courage and compassion, of the transformative power of being truly seen and truly loved. And in that way, Viggo and Hannah's love story never really ended. It lived on in their descendants, in the cabin that still stood in the mountains, in the stories told around fires and dinner tables, in the very land itself that had witnessed their beginning and held their memories. They had pulled each other from the edges to the center, and that center had expanded to touch countless lives across generations. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, of the mountains and valleys where it had unfolded, of the two people who had lived it with such fierce devotion and tender care. A reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures are not about conquering territories or finding gold, but about finding another person and choosing to build a life together, day by day, year by year, until the love between them becomes as permanent and enduring as the mountains themselves.